All right, friends. Hey, how's it going? Kevin here again. I wanted to do a little bit of a training on what to do once you've finished your composition and you've got everything working and it's sounding great. How do you deliver that mockup? Well, the easiest way to do that, there's a couple ways you could do that, but the easiest way to do that is literally hit play and record everything all at once, right? So if you followed along in Audio Playback Magic, then you're able to have Sibelius running, main stage and Logic at the same time, and you've got all of your sounds interconnected. And when you hit play in your notation file, your Sibelius file, you should hear all of the sounds, right? So for example, I'm going to hit play right here, and you should hear all of the instruments. Logic is playing back, Sibelius VDL sounds are playing back, and then I've got main stage doing all the synth stuff, right? So now the good news is, because you've got everything connected, in theory, you could just record your audio playback and now you've got a mock-up. And I think that's kind of the magic of Audio Playback Magic, the course. Now, there's a couple things that are good and bad about this approach. Number one, what's amazing about it is that you have a mock-up that's kind of ready to go. You can just hit record in real time and you can get that delivered really quickly, right? You're not spending a bunch of time, extra time, refining it, mixing it, mastering it. This is really, really useful for like the daily grind, right? Like, so if you just finished writing and you need to get a mock-up to your students or your client, this is an amazing way to do that. Or for example, if I'm in the middle of the season and I have to make an edit, right? Like I got to take a couple bars out or add a couple bars, new samples, whatever. I can just record that section of music even in real time and just send that out. It's just built for speed, right? Now, the drawbacks to doing it like that all the time is that you don't have that kind of extreme fine tuning control over every single element in the mix, right? And so while this does work to get a pretty good 90% or 80% of the way there mock-up, it's not going to get you the 100% of the way there in terms of making something that is just has all the potential of a DAW, right? A digital audio workstation, where you can add a ton of other effects and automation to really bring that mix to life and let it sparkle. And so what I wanted to show you is what my process looks like once I'm done writing. It's all done, it's delivered to the clients, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to take this product to that next level, right? How do I record it? So, well, the easiest way, like I showed you, is for me, it's to use an application called Audio Hijack, right? So I've got this application up. It looks like this. And I believe there's a free version that gives you a time limit that you can only record up to. And for most marching movements, you should be able to get it recorded without hitting the time limit. But for me, since I use this application every single day, I think it's, not that expensive. It might be $50 or less. This is something that I use all the time. So I highly recommend this application. So the way that I do this is I've built out 3 little modules. Actually, I'll just build it from scratch for everybody. So I'm going to delete these 5 blocks. So if I've got a new blank session here in Audio Hijack, I'm going to look over here to the right to the sources window, and I'm going to just drag in this application box, right? And I'm going to just have 3 of these because I've got main stage, Sibelius, and Logic. And then I'm going to select an application. Running application is Logic Pro. Okay, then this one, select an app, running app, main stage, and then this one finally for Sibelius, right? And so this Sibelius is playing back all of my VDL sounds or any built-in DLS MIDI, or for me, my woodwind sounds are happening within Sibelius. And then main stage is all of my synth sounds. And currently Logic is all of my brass sounds plus soloists and a couple like cymbals and gongs and stuff like that. So all of those things together is what makes the recording for me. Now, what you could do is you could do a couple different things. You can The next thing I would definitely create is just a peak meter so that you can see how everything is flowing together. Make sure you add a output device and set that to whatever your output is. Otherwise you won't hear anything. For my purposes, I'm going to delete this or I'm going to turn it off. But for you, it's going to be on because I'm already recording on another session of Audio Hijack. So for you, this is going to stay on. Okay. Otherwise you won't be able to hear it as it's playing back. And then finally, you're going to put a recorder right at the end of it. And by default, it's on MP3, but we're going to change that. So I'm going to set this to custom. Okay. And then format, let's do a WAV file, 24-bit, 48. Now it's really important that all of your programs, whenever you're recording and doing any of this stuff, everything is in sync with these settings, right? So you want the bit depth, 24-bit, sample rate, 48. Some of you might be using 44.1. That's okay. Just got to make sure that in Sibelius, in MainStage, and in Logic, all of those settings are exactly the same, okay? And then you can just set your save to folder. So I have it saving to Audio Hijack. You can create a new folder, or you can set that to the folder of your project, whatever you want. At the end of the day, you're going to have to find those and organize everything together, right? So basically what I'm going to do here is when I have this off, you'll see down here, this record button just turned gray. So what you'll see is when I hit play right here and I hit this record button, you can see all of the sound that's going to be coming through Audio Hijack. Okay, it's going into my output device and then it's going to hit the recorder. Now, as soon as I turn this on, now it's recording, right? So one way to do that is, let's say you wanted to just start recording right here. What we're going to do is I'm going to select this measure, for example, and I'm going to hit P for play. Now for me, it takes about a half a second or so for Sibelius to trigger. So I have enough time. By the time I hit P for play in Sibelius, I can just sneak over here and hit record, right? So P for play and then record. And because I've done this so many times, I'm fast enough to get over there and hit record. Now for you, you might just hit record here first and then come into here and then hit play in your Sibelius file. That's fine too. It's just a matter of your personal preference and workflow. So that's the easiest way to do this, right? Like this is, I would say 85 to 90% of the time when I'm sending recordings to people, if I finish a movement, or if I make an edit, or if I have a draft of something and I want to send it to somebody, this is what I'm doing. I finish my writing process and I open up Audio Hijack. I've got everything routed, so it's all connected, and I hit record. I play through it one time in real time. I finish the recording. I find the file, I rename it, and I send it off. And that's the easiest way to do it for me. Now, if you want, you could set this to MP3 and even make the file even smaller, right? So for the purposes of the next few steps, that's why I had you set it up to WAV. But you could set this to MP3 if this is the only step you want to take in exporting your audio. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, if you want to have fine-tuned control, and that's something we're going to be covering in our next workshop. So if you want to join us for that and you want to prepare your stems and get them all ready so that we can get into Logic and mix and master, there's a couple ways that you can do that. Okay. So for example, again, I'm using these three programs, but you can find the equivalent way of doing it in your program if you're using Finale or Dorico. And then if you're using another DAW, you can figure out conceptually the different ways to do this. But basically what I would do is a couple different things. Now, if I wanted to do a really, really intensive mockup, then I would export every single stave in my file, right? And for some, that might be the level that you want to take your mock-ups to. And if you want to find a happy medium somewhere in between starting totally just recording it one time and finding a space between that and the other extreme, which is record every single stave, something that I have done in the past is I'll kind of record things in groups. And then when I go to mix, I'm mixing groups and I'm not necessarily mixing every single track, right? So here's how I would do that. So for example, in my file, I've got this metronome track, and then I've got woodwinds, and then I've got this set of brass, which plays back in Logic, and then another set of brass staves, which are kind of just the built-in Logic sounds. And I talked about that in Audio Playback Magic. I do that because if I want to do some work in the file, but I don't want to open up Mainstage or Logic, I still have the DLS MIDI sounds. And I actually kind of like those sounds to add a little bit of attack and articulation. So what I'm going to do is I've got this set of brass, and then I've got the battery, then these percussion additional staves where I kind of put any extra percussion things that might happen on my keyboards. Then I've got all my VDL keyboards. I've got my synths that are plugged into Mainstage, timpani, VDL, my racks, which are all VDL, and then a bunch of other extra staves. Some of them are cymbal gongs and stuff like that. So basically, you're going to handle this in 3 different batches, right? So all of the sounds that happen in Sibelius, you're going to record and be able to just export them directly from Sibelius, right? And the way that I do that is, for example, with these woodwinds, I can select all the woodwinds, and I'll go to File, Export, Audio, okay? Now, this is important, the format. Remember, we talked about that format earlier. I want everything to match. So I'm going to go Wave, 24-bit, 48K, and I'm going to figure out where I'm going to put it. So I have to hit Browse, then let's go to the folder, and then I'll make a new folder called Stems. Okay, and so it's going here, and then I just need to name it. So I'll call it Part 2 Woodwinds, right? And then I'll hit Export. And Sibelius is literally going to export all of the playback that's happening on those staves. And the cool thing is it's not real time. It's just happening computationally. And so when I go and I find that file now, you're going to see that it's a larger file, 47 megabytes, and it starts from the very beginning. So it's the whole entire concert. And whenever the woodwinds are playing, it's capturing everything, right? So let me just show you everything I would export. I would export the metronome. Another little side note, I have a metronome staff that I use that I mute and unmute, and I actually record the metronome this way. And the reason for that is because I can control the accents and that I want on the met track, right? So if it's, for example, an opener and it's really loud in a section, then I can have that really loud accent on the metronome. But for example, on the ballad, I can have an accent on beat 1 and then have beat 2, 3, and 4 be a little softer, right? So it's not so annoying when I make this metronome click track. Or I can do kind of cues with the metronome, or I can do subdivisions depending on if there's an accel or a retardando, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the reason why I have a metronome track. And later, when I bounce just the metronome, I can put that in and stack all these in my Logic document. And that way I can make mockups with a metronome and without, and it's already right there. I don't have to reprogram it. So that's the reason that I would export the metronome tracks. So I would export the metronome. Then the next thing is I did all the flutes. Now I've got this solo flugelhorn, which is being triggered in Logic. So I'm going to come back to that because I can't do that computationally. I have to do that. I have to record that in real time. The next thing I have is, again, this is the Logic brass. So I'm going to have to record that in real time. Then I've got the brass that's being played back by Sibelius. You can hear what that sounds like. So yeah, I want a recording of that. So I'll go File, Export, Audio. All of these settings are good already. For some reason, I'm going to have to keep picking the stems folder. So part 2, and I'll call that MIDI brass. That's just what I call it. I know that that's the Sibelius brass. Okay. So now that same thing, it'll export everything. Okay. Now, again, if you wanted to fine tune control all of these instruments, then you would select every single one of those staves and export them. So you could do just trumpet 1, trumpet 2, trumpet 3, or you could do just the trumpets, and then you could do just the horns and maybe just the low brass. So it's up to you how complex you want to make this. The more staves that you export, the more control you'll have later, and the more you can really craft the panning and the EQ and the compression for every single one of those staves. The only drawback to that is it's going to take a lot more time. It's a lot more resources and just adding complexity. So I'm giving you options. You can go from the extreme simple, just record the whole thing in one pass, to all the way to record every single stave, right? And then finally, we've got, I'm not going to do every single one here. I'm just kind of giving you broad strokes, but you've got all of your battery. I'll export just the battery. And remember, anything I select, that's what Sibelius is going to export, but it's going to export it from the very beginning. So I'll export all the battery. Then I'll export, for example, metals like the Crotali and Glock together. Then I'll export the vibraphones. I'll export the Xylo by itself. I'll export all of the marimbas as one audio because I've kind of already got them balanced within themselves. There could be an argument made to do a lot more in depth here, especially from a panning perspective. But, me personally, I'm going to keep it grouped just as an option. Now, finally, we've got timpani and then racks. Again, those I would export from Sibelius. Now, let's talk about the real-time playback that's going to be recorded. So a couple things. I've got synths here. So you can do a couple different things here. If you've already got all of your synth sounds in MainStage relatively balanced, which is kind of how I operate, I'm getting my MainStage file as I'm composing, and I'm importing into MainStage, and all of my samples and everything. As I'm composing, I'm balancing everything kind of in real time. And so for me, my 3 synth parts hypothetically are fairly balanced to themselves when I hit play on this file. So I can select all of these synths, right? And then I can pull up my audio hijack, right? And then what I can do is I'm going to turn off Sibelius, and I'm going to turn off Logic, and then I'm just going to hit P for play, and then I'm going to hit record, right? Now, a couple different things here. A lot of times it's going to be when you go to import your staves that you've recorded from Sibelius, they're all starting exactly the same spot, this measure 0. And when I just drag them into, for example, Logic, and I, slide it all the way to the left at measure 1, it's going to, all the staves are going to line up perfectly automatically. Now, when I do this recording in real time, it's not going to be exact. It's going to depend on how quickly I could press record, right? So if it took me a few seconds to hit record, well, those few seconds are going to be at the beginning of the track. And so I found a little bit of a hack to get around that, right? So one thing you could do is I'm going to turn on Sibelius. And remember this little metronome track up here? Okay. If I open up the mixer and I just play up here, you'll hear this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select that track, and then I'm going to select the synths. So let's hear what that sounds like. So what's going to happen is I'm going to hear the first track. The first sound I'm going to hear are those clicks. And then I'm going to mute the metronome after 4 clicks. So it's going to sound like this. Okay, and so let me pause that. The reason I'm going to do that is when I look at that stem after it's been recorded, I'll see those 4 clicks, and I'll know that the very first click is perfectly on measure 0, which is where all of my Sibelius stems line up. So it's really easy for me to crop in, chop right on the beginning of that click, line up all the files, and then I'll just chop that measure of clicks out of the synth part. And that's just a little trick to get all the synth parts to line up when you have to record those in real time, but you're trying to line them up against all these exported Sibelius staves. Does that make sense? So you're going to use that little metronome trick to record the solo parts that are being triggered in Logic, right? So I would do the same exact thing. I would start up here, select this measure and select the first measure of metronome, turn it up, hit play, and then pull the slider down so that it's not recording anymore, okay? And remember, you still have to hit record in Audio Hijack. So we've got the solo part that we're going to record, and then the same exact thing, all of the brass stuff, we're going to do the same exact thing. So these are my brass staves. So I'll do the same thing. I'll hit, I'll turn on the metronome, and then I'll click that in, and depending on the way that your brass enters, if it's entering in super loud, then you'll be able to see that when you export it. And so lining that up, you don't have to do the metronome trick every time. If if the brass comes in on a really loud moment, you'll be able to line that up really easily. But if you have synth parts that kind of creep in, that metronome trick is really going to make your life way easier later. And so eventually I'll have all of these different stems kind of organized into this folder, right? So I'll have all of my Sibelius exported stems, and then I'll have all of my Logic recorded, live recorded stems, and then I'll have all of my main stage recorded synth parts. And again, you could break that up as complex or simple as you want. Like you could do all the brass recorded at once, or you could do trumpets only, horns, trombones, tuba, or you could do every single trumpet part. You could do synth 1, synth 2, synth 3, etc., etc. So you can get as micro in there as you want, but the moral of this story is what we're doing here is we're preparing ourselves to take this mockup to the next level by having organized and exported stems. Hopefully this was really, really helpful to you guys. And let me know if you have any questions on this process, because we really want to set you up for success. And I really hope to see a lot of you at our 5-day workshop for mixing and mastering. And we've really prepared a lot of material already in advance. And the way that we're going to approach this is really special. We're going to give you a little bit of training every single day, but we're going to walk you through exercises and assignments and have a really awesome communal aspect where we're going to ask everyone to share what they did that day and really get in there and get your hands dirty and give feedback to each other and really listen and see different approaches and see different plugins and really kind of take action and achieve results and try to make some better mock-ups. So again, hopefully this was really, really helpful, and we'll see you then. Thanks.